This is CB Up for Discussion, a podcast series from Community Business where we tackle DE&I and Wellbeing hot topics with special guests from across Asia.
Hello, I am Asha Nair, Director of Operations from Community Business, and I'll be your podcast host for this episode of Up for Discussion. Today, we are delighted to be in a new episode with Jeiz Robles, our very own Director DE&I at Community Business. Jeiz is a Filipina, bisexual, neurodivergent woman recognized globally on the top 20 of Involve's Global LGBTQ Future Leaders for several years. Jeiz, welcome to Community Business and to India office. You've been working very closely with Community Business for quite a few years now on the client side. How does it feel to be on the other side of the road?
It's great. I've had the privilege of being a DE&I member in my previous organization, so this space is a very familiar space for me. And as a member of several communities, I'm also very excited to be working with more communities with community business. And Asha, you yourself have also moved from the corporate side to work in the DE&I space with more than 23 years of experience in companies like GE, Genpact, HSBC, and Commonwealth Bank of Australia. What has been your thinking behind the move?
I'm thrilled to be joining Community Business, absolutely. And I'm equally in gratitude for my stint with corporates. It's been a good 20 plus years of journey right there. I cherish the learnings. Some of them were hard-eating goals, but they taught me a lot of things and have made me who I have become today. Not to mention the friendships that have continued through ages and lifetimes, as to speak, right? As an individual, even as a kid, I was quite taken in by human as a concept. How we form our connections, how are our societies formed, what are the rules and regulations, and so on and so forth, right? Like I used to be very observant in school as well. And I had paid attention to the idea of how those interactions change over time and how they change us and our relationships. In fact, I remember thinking to myself, how powerful might we be as individuals because we can move another person to tears or to joy or to anger or to frustration or even motivate them to do something that we wouldn't have originally thought that we could do, right? So suffice to say that cultural and social anthropology and the landscape was something that always interested me. Yet, my professional journey always kept me in the corporate worlds, especially in outsourcing and banking with business operations and transformation. But there was always a search for something more meaningful. And I'm not new to not-for-profits. I did about almost a decade ago take a year-long sabbatical and volunteered at a not-for-profit in Romania that took care of orphaned and abandoned kids. So that experience only solidified the idea that I did want to do something very much in the space of humans and society and how it touched them. Long story short, we lost mom a couple of years ago. And that was just in the first 2 months of having joined a new organization. And I didn't think it was right to not pay attention to the promises that I had made when they hired me. So I took my time and concluded on the deliverables and took a break last year, December. So this year, around March, April, when I was thinking about coming into workforce, is when the idea hit me that maybe this is universe trying to give me a second opportunity of wanting to do something different. And guess what? Look at the amazement when I realized that there was an opening in operations in community business. And as they say, rest is history.
Wow. First of all, Asha, thank you so much for sharing your story. And I'm so sorry to hear about your mom. But I guess from a community business standpoint, it's an exciting start, especially with how DE&I is also progressing in India in this space.
Oh, absolutely. Let's deep dive into the topic of the conversation itself, right? Diversity, equity, and inclusion in Asia is gaining momentum, and a lot of organizations and societies recognize the value of diverse workforce and inclusivity and the practices around it. Countries like Hong Kong, Japan, India, Singapore are leading the way by implementing policies to enhance everything related to DE&I. So, Jeiz, we are absolutely excited to have you. I know this is a topic of immense passion for you, right? What has been your experience in this space, and how have you seen DE&I evolve?
Yeah, well, it all started almost a decade ago when I became a business resource group or a pride network leader in IBM. And it was an organization that really values inclusion for decades now. Long story short, after doing a lot of volunteer work, I eventually got absorbed into the diversity and inclusion team where I worked as a marketplace diversity leader for Asia Pacific. So I spent 3 years there working with our strategic partners, our clients, our vendors, our civil society organization partners in terms of their diversity and inclusion journey and their impact to the community and how we can make the same for the business and with the business. So in terms of the evolution that I've seen, it really started with celebration months, Women's Month, Pride Month, Disability Month, and how companies started taking part in these celebrations. But those actually started to give visibility to the different communities. And from there, companies started seeing its impact to talent from a recruitment, retention, development standpoint. And countries also started to have some quotas for disability, for example. So it started to build some compliance mindset. Eventually, the pandemic happened and more emphasis on employee well-being and mental health started to get talked about. And that actually highlighted the intersectional lenses when it comes to diversity and inclusion. And through that time, ESG has also been something that CEOs started seeing to be very important. And diversity and inclusion as a social aspect to that really brought that conversation in the very senior levels. As a result, we are now seeing a lot of diversity and inclusion roles being based in APAC and how organizational support is naturally being given. So from the discussions of diversity in the past, now it's all about inclusion and belonging.
Oh, wow. That is a deeply passionate way to put it. Thank you. What do you think are some of the emerging trends in this space that are here to stay?
I think a lot of us are seeing how there's really lack of APAC-specific data when it comes to diversity and inclusion. And many organizations, as well as companies, and organizations like community business, are doing research that's specific to our region. So more and more data is now emerging. In fact, just in the last couple of years, there have been diversity and inclusion toolkits that have been deployed in different countries. For example, in the Philippines, an LGBT workplace inclusion playbook was created. In Thailand, that's the same. And then just within this year, Malaysia had deployed a DEI implementation guide that's very specific to the local community. So a lot of those are actually emerging. Not to mention, from a disability standpoint, we are having deeper conversations. We are talking about invisible disabilities and neurodiversity. Now, from an LGBTQ plus standpoint, we are tackling the the G, the B, the T, the QIA, all the specific experiences of the communities within the community, having deeper conversations. We are also recognizing how in Asia, we have a lot of employees who are caregivers. And finally, social mobility is actually something that a lot of companies are paying attention to and how they can make an impact to that.
Wow. What I'm hearing you say is, as a society, we seemingly have taken leaps and bounds of progress and stride in this arena, but we still have a very, very long way to go.
Yeah.
Could you share some of your lived experiences?
Yeah. like in my introduction, right, as a cisgender, bisexual, neurodivergent woman, my journey to self-acceptance really came in phases. Being raised Catholic and the eldest in the family, there's a concept of having to be reliable and responsible and accountable for the family. So for years during my teenage years, I really had to hide parts of myself. And of course, that has an impact on self acceptance that takes a toll on someone. It wasn't until I met my then partner, now wife, who helped me through that journey. And then eventually, as we joined IBM, we saw that opportunity to actually make an impact to others as well. So that's where my advocacy started, when we were actually thinking about starting our own family. And in a country like the Philippines, where our relationship is not recognized, there were so many questions. How do we actually do that? Do we have the means to even do that? Insurance, taxes, how will that work? But thankfully, within our company, we can make a difference. So that's when we started working on equal benefits for the LGBT plus community. But when we did that, I thought, it shouldn't just be happening in IBM. It should be happening in all of the companies in the Philippines. So I started to be more active in the Philippine Financial and Inter-Industry Pride, where now for 11 years, we have been helping other companies, both multinational and local companies, to have LGBTQ plus inclusive policies and benefits of their own. Now, since then, coming out has been a constant exercise. And eventually, I also started discovering more and more about myself, where in 2019, I also discovered part of myself that was part of the neurodiversity community. And so that's a story for another day, but that definitely revealed things in me that until now, I'm still trying to discover.
Thank you so much for sharing that so vulnerably, Jeiz. Appreciate the journey that you've been through, and even more thrilled and kudos to you for having emerged stronger. What, according to you, are some of the measures that we can use to look at how the society is progressing in this arena?
Very good question. It's a question that I get every day. Being in the business space, we often talk about returns on investment, and we can't help but get asked this question. So it's easy to get caught up in the quantitative measures, which include some examples like self-identification, workforce diversity, NPS scores in events that are facilitated, growth in employee network membership, growth in executive supporters, or growth in allies, which are all useful. But to me, the real measure is actually when people can freely talk about their experiences, their ideas, and themselves without second guessing themselves. When everyone has a seat on the table, and when people aren't afraid to be associated to different communities, when they are growing, when their lives are improving. It's hard to quantify, yes, but there are ways. For example, in simple conversations or in meetings, count the number of voices that you are getting, who are actually on the table. Be conscious of the diversity of that. Count the number of ideas that are generated for diverse product development. Diversity engagement scores, are they improving year on year? Your number of diversity suppliers, or diverse suppliers rather, are you working more with the community as vendors? Retention, promotion, they are just some, but there are definitely ways.
Wow, that is indeed some out of the box thinking, and there's so much more we can do. But tell me, what are some of the challenges and considerations in practicing inclusion and ensuring effectiveness of DEI is managed?
Good question. There's so much out there. Starting with how in APAC, collectivism versus individualism is something that's very important to us. What that means is, as an individual, our well-being is highly dependent on our relationships with our families and our communities. So, what's important to one is not more important than what's important to many. And that's not the case in the other regions. Another thing is language and dialects. How do you even translate diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging into hundreds of those local languages? Sometimes you can't. And when you can, sometimes it changes its meaning. So you have to be very conscious of that. Not to mention legal and social frameworks. In some countries, there are still limitations in what women can do. Disability is defined very differently, and compliance requirements are also very varied. LGBTQ plus inclusion is also looked at in a different lens, where there are countries where it's treated as a crime to be part of the community, and there are countries that are where it's neither legal or illegal. So from that, we also look at conflicting DEI and business priorities, which I think we can all relate, right? The intersections of identities, race, ethnicity, religion, caste, class, and more play out in different ways in the different countries that we work on. So as a result, allyship can actually look very different in different areas, where if in one context it means standing up and speaking up with the community, in other contexts it can also mean just being in the same room with the community members is a huge sign of allyship already. So we have to be very conscious of that.
Wow. That is a whole lot of considerations that we've got to stay and keep in mind with. But I feel one of the most important ones is community itself.
Yeah.
So how does community building play a role in driving DE&I?
Yeah, it's you're right. It's really very important to involve the community in anything that we do. So it takes effort to build communities in organizations. For example, managing your direct reports is very different from how you manage volunteers who make an impact to the advocacy that they are very passionate about. So imagine motivating and inspiring employees to do that. That's a huge lot of work, but it has to be done. The community needs to be able to contribute to your DEI strategy, because that's what makes your strategy appropriate to your industry and to your company. Otherwise, if you're just copying market trends, it might not be applicable or appropriate to the local employee base that you have. Now, DEI is an ever-evolving journey, and this is why in community business, we also have the Diversity and Inclusion in Asia Network, a community for communities, because in this line of work, it's important to feel that you are also not alone and that you can do things together and advance together towards the ever-changing needs of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Wow. More power to you as the DE&I Director of Community Business, and to Community Business to taking on this journey further. There's one last question we always ask our guests. What do you think the biggest way we can make a ripple of change throughout society is?
It's hard to choose one. So, because there's so much we can do, either big or small. But I think I'll oversimplify it and just say that as an individual or organization, for as long as you're taking one step at a time towards inclusion, it can actually go a long way. As DEI professionals, we are both doing the work, but also fighting for us to be able to do that work. So it's really not easy, whether it's creating spaces for voices that are unheard, working with various communities to deploy initiatives, or as simple as being kind. For as long as you are not stopping to take one step at a time, you will make a ripple of change in whatever space you're in. So it's so easy to get intimidated, to get burnt out, but just don't stop is my message. And I think it would also be valuable to ask this to our audience. If you can leave it in the comments, what do you think can we do to make a ripple of change throughout the society?
Tell us more.
Thank you for listening to CB Up for Discussion. For more information about our work across Asia, head to the Community Business website.